Maria, Lavko and Karen. That was wonderful. Grace and peace to you, dear friends. First of all, a Merry Christmas to everyone. As we gather tonight, we gather as honest people. And the honest truth is, there's a lot of darkness in our world. But we also gather as hopeful people, and our hope is rooted in a promise that God made many years ago. About 700 years before Jesus was born, Isaiah the prophet wrote this: "For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." The friend Jesus Christ entered into this world to bring us peace. And I want to begin tonight my sermon by sharing with you one of my favorite stories about Christmas peace. It is one of those stories that you hear and you will not forget it. Some of you might know it even already. It took place back on Christmas Eve, 1914, during World War I. It was on the battlefield called Flanders, which is in the country of Belgium, and the battlefield stretched for miles and miles. On one side of this field, there was the German army. On the other side of the field, there was the British and French who were fighting together. And needless to say, fighting in a war means killing each other. So both sides were dug into their trenches and they were ready for battle. And in between those two armies there was this muddy, icy area that they called No Man's Land. On that Christmas Eve in 1914, something totally unexpected happened on that stretch of the battlefield. The British looked across an icy field in the dark and they saw these little evergreen trees being placed on top of the German trenches. Christmas trees. And then they started to see these signs behind the trees. The Germans hold signs up, some of them in German, some of them in broken English. The most common one was, "You no fight, we no fight." Some of the British units started making their own signs now that said, "Merry Christmas." And the Germans responded back. Finally, a group of German officers came up out of their trenches and a group of British officers came out to meet them in that no man's land, and they shook hands and they agreed to a Christmas truce. There would be no fighting, no firing from then until midnight on Christmas Day. Well, the British High Command was stationed about 27 miles behind the trenches, and when they heard what was happening, they were horrified. They sent a message to the front lines, and it said this: "Fraternization with the enemy discourages initiative in commanders and destroys the offensive spirit in all ranks." That message was ignored. Then the High Command sent another message. It said, "It is thought possible the enemy may be contemplating an attack during Christmas or New Year. Especially vigilance will be maintained during this period." That message was also ignored. In fact, the soldiers on both sides were so caught up in this truth that they started pouring out of their trenches and meeting in the middle. The that they had not been able to reach out because of the conflict. And then those soldiers started to exchange gifts of chocolate cake and sauerkraut and tobacco and newspaper. Some even had a soccer ball, and they organized a soccer game in the dark on the icy mud of that battlefield. What an incredible sight that must have been. One of the British soldiers who was there wrote this: "What a sight! Little groups of Germans and British extending almost the length of our front. Out of the darkness we could hear laughter and see lighted matches. Everyone seems to be getting on nicely. Here we were, laughing and chatting to men who only a few hours before we were trying to kill." Dear friends, isn't that an amazing story? And of course, news traveled a lot slower back then, but it made its way to the newspapers. With headlines like this: "A historic moment, British and German soldiers celebrating together." And for sure, this was a memorable event. 85 years later, they put up a memorial at the Flanders. It says, "The Khaki Seventh Christmas Truce, 1914 to 1999. 85 years. Lest we forget." Now, dear friends, we have to be honest. The day after Christmas, the fighting continued, and it was a very brutal war, as we all know. But for that brief moment, at Christmas time, enemies became friends, and people got a little taste of the peace that Jesus came to bring. Let me ask you a very personal question now. How is the peace level in your life? And let me be more specific. How is the peace level in your home? You probably heard about it, that Christmas dinner is sometimes the favorite time to have a nice argument. Did you hear about it? Yeah, God bless you too, Paul. Merry Christmas to you. Yeah, God bless you, Paul. Yeah, see you. Yeah, we stopped at the Christmas dinner and maybe, hopefully, not having an argument. So how is it with the peace level in your home? Is there a sense of love and respect and appreciation that pervades your home? Or would your home better be described words like bitterness, name-calling, lack of forgiveness? How is the peace level in your home? And if it's not very high, then I would bet that you would gladly give up the greatest gift, Christmas gifts in the world, if you could somehow have peace in return. I was thinking the other day about some of the famous Christmas stories that we watch or read about at Christmas time. And I realized that most of these Christmas stories have a common theme or a common pattern. And here's the theme. Many of those Christmas stories have a character who is usually just mean, nasty, and just isn't at peace with anyone. And then something happens, usually towards the end of the story, and that person undergoes a transformation, and they become gentle and loving, and all of a sudden they are at peace with the people around them. You can probably think of some Christmas stories that have that These stories talk about new people. These stories talk about how people find their peace. And dear friends, what do all these Christmas stories tell us? It is possible. It is possible that we experience such a change. There is peace, there is reconciliation, and just like the Christmas truce of 1914, there's something in our heart that tells us that there's a way to be as we are supposed to be. And the only power in this world that is strong enough to change our hearts and bring us peace is the Prince of Peace, Jesus. So, to give peace a chance means actually to give Jesus a chance to meet you where you are and to bless your lives with His life-changing power of love and peace. Jesus has this unique ability to bring peace. But He also brings peace in our hearts. And He can bring peace into your homes. I'm at the end of my sermon. Last question is, how do we get the peace of Christ into our homes or hearts? How do we do it? If we don't know how to do it, then it was, or is more or less useless to talk about it. So how do you get the peace of Christ into your home, into your house? Any idea? Do you feel a little bit too much quizzing Him? No. So, okay. How do we get the peace of Christ into our home and heart? Any idea?
Yeah, tell me. I'd like to know.
I know. But you should know also. Are you practicing what you are hearing here? It's getting too personal. Do you have the feeling it's too personal? Ja, natürlich. Ich weiß. Ja, ja. You know, it is very simple. Nothing has changed throughout the centuries. Make God's will to your own will. And how do you get to know God's will? Very simple again. Have a look at your Bible. Take the dust of the Bible and read it. Meditate a little bit, pray a little bit. You have not to read the whole Bible from the beginning to the end. You know, after a few days you would put it away anyway, because there's the boring parts like memory and passages. And I know that. Read the right passages. Look at the Psalms, maybe the Gospel of John. Read the beautiful Christmas story. Start with Luke chapter 1, chapter 2. Read it. And let these words talk to you. Okay, that's it. Have a peaceful Christmas. Enjoy yourself, enjoy your families, enjoy your dinners, and kids, enjoy your gifts.